It is September 28, 2008. On a coral island called Omelek, 2,500 miles southwest of Hawaii, a small group of engineers is staring at a 68-foot rocket bolted to a launch stand on the reef. Their company has launched 3 rockets before this one. All 3 exploded. Their boss, a 37-year-old who just got divorced and does not currently own a house, has put almost every dollar he owns into this thing. If this 4th rocket fails, the company is done. The engineers will go home. The dream of a private spaceflight industry, the one that the United States government and Boeing and Lockheed have spent 50 years quietly insisting is impossible, will go with it. The countdown begins. T-10, T-9. Inside a converted shipping container 2 miles away, Elon Musk stares at a monitor. 8, 7, 6. He has enough money, his accountants have told him, for exactly one more attempt after this one. 5, 4, 3. In 2008, building a rocket from scratch is something only governments do. The United States does it, Russia does it, China and France and Japan and India do it. Total cost to reach orbit, by industry consensus, runs between $300 and $500 million per launch, and even then the rockets occasionally fail. The Atlas V costs around $160 million per flight. The Delta IV Heavy costs more than $400 million. These vehicles are built by companies with 60 years of NASA contracts, tens of thousands of engineers, and entire towns in Alabama and Florida dependent on the work. SpaceX has, at this moment, around 500 employees, a single rocket on a single Pacific reef, and a payload that is not a real satellite. It is a 165-kilogram aluminum dummy. If you want to understand how impossible builds actually happen, subscribe. This story is one of the strangest in the history of aerospace. The thing they are trying to do has never been done by anyone outside a national government. To understand how a Pacific reef became the last hope of private spaceflight, rewind 6 years. March 2002. A 30-year-old internet entrepreneur named Elon Musk has just sold his stake in PayPal to eBay for $180 million after tax. He is rich. He could buy an island. He could retire and never work again. Instead, he reads every book on rocket science he can find, drives out to the Mojave Desert to watch amateur rocket clubs, and tries twice to buy refurbished Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles to put a small greenhouse on Mars. The Russians double their price, then triple it, then laugh at him. On the flight home from Moscow, he opens a spreadsheet. He starts adding up what raw aluminum, titanium, copper, and carbon fiber cost on the open market. The number is roughly 2% of what the existing rocket industry charges for a finished vehicle. Musk decides he is going to build the rocket himself. He incorporates the company on March 14, 2002. He calls it Space Exploration Technologies. The first office is a 3,000-square-foot warehouse at 1310 East Grand Avenue in El Segundo, California, 10 minutes from the Los Angeles airport. There are a few cubicles, a coffee machine, and almost nothing else. Musk needs a propulsion engineer. He drives to a backyard in the Mojave where a man named Tom Mueller is firing the largest amateur-built liquid rocket engine on Earth. Musk asks him one question. If you could design a real rocket engine, what is the absolute minimum it would cost? Mueller gives him a number. Musk hires him on the spot. For avionics, he hires a German engineer named Hans Koenigsmann. The brief is brutal. Build a flight computer from off-the-shelf hardware, with 20 engineers, not the 1,000 that NASA would use. The team grows to 160 employees by November of 2005. They name the first stage engine Merlin, after a medium-sized Falcon. They name the second stage engine Kestrel. They call the rocket Falcon 1. The rocket has not flown. The team has never built one. What Mueller and his engineers are trying to do has not been seriously attempted in 40 years. Almost every American liquid-fueled rocket engine in service in 2003 traces back to programs from the 1960s. Apollo, Saturn, the Space Shuttle. The institutional knowledge sits inside Boeing, Lockheed, and Aerojet, locked behind decades of NASA contracts. Mueller has none of it, so he starts from a single principle. Every part is built in-house, in El Segundo, on machine tools the company owns. No subcontractors, no legacy suppliers, no 15-month wait for a single bracket. The Merlin engine fires for the first time on a test stand in McGregor, Texas in 2003. It is the first new American hydrocarbon rocket engine designed from a blank sheet of paper since the Apollo program ended. The propellant is kerosene and liquid oxygen, the same recipe as the Saturn V's first stage. The engine, Mueller will later say, was built by a team that, on paper, was too small and too young to attempt it. They just did not know that yet. Inside the rocket industry, almost nobody takes SpaceX seriously. The conventional wisdom is simple and, by the standards of 40 years of evidence, correct. Rockets are the hardest engineering humans have ever attempted. The fuel-to-payload ratio is brutal. A rocket is essentially a thin metal tube full of explosives that must accelerate to 17,000 miles per hour in 8 minutes without disassembling itself. A single misrouted bolt, a single contaminated valve, a single millisecond timing error in a computer ends the mission. Established rocket companies survive failures only because they have governments writing checks. SpaceX has Elon Musk's bank account. Industry analysts at the time openly predict the company will fail. A senior figure at one major aerospace prime tells a reporter that nobody outside a state-backed program has ever reached orbit with a liquid-fueled rocket, and there is no reason to believe anybody ever will. By 2005, Musk has spent roughly $100 million of his PayPal money on the project. The first rocket is almost ready. He needs a launch site. Cape Canaveral says no. The United States Air Force, which controls Cape Canaveral, will not give a new private company a launch pad. SpaceX gets one option: a small atoll in the Marshall Islands called Kwajalein, leased by the U.S. Army as a ballistic missile test range, specifically a coral spit called Omelek Island. Omelek is 2 acres of sand, a few palm trees, and nothing else. There is no launch pad. There is no fuel storage. There is no road. To get to the island, the team flies 28 hours from Los Angeles to Honolulu to Kwajalein, then takes a 45-minute boat ride to a reef where coral can slice a leg open. They build the launch pad themselves, by hand, in tropical heat that destroys electronics within months. Engineers sleep in shipping containers. They wear sunscreen, get bitten by sharks on weekends, and spend 12-hour days hauling rocket parts across a beach. The first Falcon 1 ships from El Segundo to Kwajalein in late 2005. It will take more than 2 years before it ever leaves the ground. March 24, 2006. The first Falcon 1 sits on the pad, the countdown reaches 0. The Merlin engine ignites, the rocket clears the tower. For 26 seconds it climbs, then a fire breaks out near the engine. At 41 seconds, the fuel pressure collapses, the engine shuts down, the rocket tips over, and it crashes into the reef, less than 1,000 feet from the launch pad. The team finds the wreckage that evening. The post-mortem takes weeks. The cause is a single aluminum nut. The nut had been bought in El Segundo, carried halfway around the planet, and exposed to salt air on Omelek for months. It had corroded. The corrosion let fuel leak past a seal. The leak caused the fire. The rocket cost $7 million to build. It is now in pieces on a reef in the Pacific. Musk, watching from the control container, does not yell. He writes an internal memo that night saying SpaceX will fly again, and that the next rocket is already being built. The team flies home to start over. Falcon 1, Flight 2, lifts off from Omelek on March 21, 2007, almost exactly a year after Flight 1. This time, the first stage works. The Merlin burns its full duration. Stage separation succeeds. The Kestrel second stage engine ignites. For 2 minutes, it looks like SpaceX is going to orbit on its second attempt. Then the second stage starts wobbling. The propellant inside the tanks is sloshing, harder than the engineers had modeled, and the wobble grows. The engine cannot compensate. The vehicle starts to spin. 5 minutes into the flight, with the rocket far above the Pacific, the second stage shuts down. It never reaches orbital velocity. The vehicle and the payload re-enter the atmosphere and burn up. 2 failures, $15 million in hardware, and a clock that is starting to run faster than Musk had budgeted. The PayPal money is not infinite. Tesla, the electric car company he also runs, is hemorrhaging cash on the Roadster. He starts moving personal funds between accounts to keep both companies alive at the same time. The third Falcon 1 is already being built. August 2, 2008. The third Falcon 1 lifts off from Omelek carrying 3 real payloads, 2 small satellites for the U.S. Air Force and NASA, and the cremated remains of 208 people, including astronaut Gordon Cooper. This is not a test dummy. This flight matters. The launch goes well, the Merlin burns clean. Stage separation begins, and then, in the silence between the 2 stages, the upgraded first stage engine, which has slightly more thrust than the previous version, gives the booster a tiny residual push. Instead of falling away cleanly, the spent first stage drifts up and bumps the second stage from underneath. The collision throws the second stage off course. The rocket is lost 2 minutes after launch. The payloads are destroyed. The ashes of 208 people, including a Mercury astronaut, are scattered over the Pacific. 3 rockets in 2 years, 0 successes. The team flies back to California from Kwajalein in near silence. Inside SpaceX, the financial picture has gone from tight to existential. Musk has weeks, not months, to decide what to do next. Outside the company, 2008 is the worst year of Elon Musk's life. Lehman Brothers collapses 6 weeks after Flight 3. The global financial system is freezing. Tesla, which was supposed to close a major investment round that fall, watches the round fall apart as investors panic. Musk's first marriage ends in a public divorce. He is not living in his own home, he is sleeping on friends' couches in Los Angeles and on a small bed in the back of the SpaceX office. He takes out personal loans against his last assets to make Tesla payroll. By his own later admission, he is having mild nervous breakdowns in his car on the drive into work. The PayPal fortune that was supposed to fund both companies is almost gone. He sits down with the leadership of both companies and tells them he has roughly $30 million left in total liquid capital. He can save one company, or he can split it between the two and risk losing both. He splits it. SpaceX gets enough cash for exactly one more launch attempt. In El Segundo, the SpaceX team begins assembling Flight 4 out of spare parts. Components that were meant to be installed later in the production line are pulled forward. Engineers work 14-hour days. The team has built 3 Falcon Ones in roughly 6 years. They build the 4th one in 6 weeks. To get the rocket to Kwajalein, SpaceX charters a Boeing C-17 cargo plane from the U.S. Air Force. Somewhere over the Pacific, the cargo bay repressurization system overshoots its target. The pressure inside the plane increases faster than the rocket's empty fuel tanks can equalize. The Falcon 1, sealed against contamination, begins to crumple. Inside the C-17, engineers watching the rocket on the bay floor literally hear it deform. They radio the cockpit and ask the pilots to depressurize the cargo bay immediately. The pilots open the valves, the rocket partially recovers its shape. When they land at Kwajalein, the team spends days repairing the tank damage by hand in tropical heat, with no manufacturer's warranty and no replacement available. The launch date holds September 28, 2008. Just before sunset on Omelek, the 4th Falcon 1 stands on the pad. Aboard is the payload SpaceX cannot afford to lose another mission for. A 165-kilogram aluminum boilerplate named RatSat, designed to weigh exactly the same as a real satellite and do absolutely nothing. The control container is 2 miles away on the next island over. Roughly 30 SpaceX employees are crammed inside. The headquarters team in El Segundo is watching the same telemetry on a screen at 1310 East Grand Avenue. Musk is in the El Segundo conference room. The countdown reaches 0. The Merlin engine ignites. The clamps release. The rocket leaves the pad cleanly. First stage burn, nominal. First stage separation, clean. The Kestrel second stage engine ignites and burns without wobble. Telemetry shows the vehicle climbing through 100 kilometers, then 200 kilometers. The second stage continues burning toward orbital velocity. Inside the control container, nobody breathes. The clock on the wall reads 9 minutes after launch. The Kestrel cuts off on schedule. Falcon 1 Flight 4 is in orbit. RatSat, 165 kilograms of aluminum, is now circling the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour, the first object ever placed into orbit by a privately developed, fully liquid-fueled rocket. The control room on Kwajalein erupts. People are shouting and crying. In El Segundo, 3,000 miles away, the engineers in the conference room go quiet for several seconds, and then everyone starts hugging at the same time. Musk walks out onto the floor of the headquarters, faces the assembled employees and says, simply, that this is one of the greatest days of his life. He says he is, quote, going to think about this for a long time before saying anything else. Then he tells them the company is not dead. He tells them they have proven it can be done. He thanks them. He goes home, to a borrowed apartment, and tries to sleep. The news travels overnight. By morning, every major aerospace publication on Earth is running the same headline. A private company has reached orbit. 3 months later, on December 23, 2008, NASA announces the winners of a contract called Commercial Resupply Services. The The contract pays for cargo flights to the International Space Station now that the space shuttle is being retired. Two companies win. Orbital Sciences gets roughly $1.9 billion. SpaceX gets roughly $1.6 billion. Musk, who later said the call came on Christmas Eve and almost did not feel real, hangs up the phone and tells the people closest to him that the company is going to live. The cash advance from NASA, structured as milestone payments tied to development progress on the Falcon 9 and the Dragon capsule, lets SpaceX expand the workforce, build a real launch complex at Cape Canaveral, and begin work on the rocket that will actually carry cargo to the station. The contract does not just save SpaceX. It validates the entire premise that a private company, working faster and cheaper than the legacy primes, can do work the United States government had paid Boeing and Lockheed to do for 50 years. Today, SpaceX launches more mass into orbit than every other launch provider on Earth, public or private, combined. The Falcon 9, the rocket built with the NASA money, has flown more than 400 times and lands its first stage back on a barge in the Atlantic Ocean as a routine procedure. The Dragon capsule has carried American astronauts to the International Space Station on more missions than the Space Shuttle did in its final decade. The Starlink network, which now provides internet to most of the planet, runs on satellites lifted by the rocket that the NASA contract paid to develop. None of it exists without RatSat. None of it exists without 4 hand-built rockets, 3 failures, a corroded nut, a sloshing second stage, a residual thrust bump, and an aluminum dummy that finally, after 6.5 years, reached orbit. Elon Musk did not disrupt the space industry. A few hundred engineers in a warehouse in El Segundo and on a coral island in the Pacific quietly built a new one, from nothing. If you want to know how more impossible things actually got built, hit subscribe.